Good morning again.
Good morning.
Still morning. As I mentioned, in church a few minutes ago, this has been on my mind for several months. And let me take you back. Why was I so offended by the?
Yeah, you gotta
Oh,
yell.
okay, I will try that. And if I go soft, yell at me, I'll recover. Why was I so offended by the notion that AI has sentience? Well, that's me. And let me take you back to when I was probably the same height, but several decades younger in college. And behavioral science class, we got to read a little booklet by B.F. Skinner. And in all the studies I did over the years, that's the only assigned reading material where I went to the professor and says, I can't finish this. And he looked at me and said, is it because of the way he portrays people? I said, yes. Now, Skinner, I assume, is familiar to most of you. He has this basic notion that all we are is stimulus response. And there was no room for anything else, no room for any sense of humanity. And as I can say in this round very clearly, no room for anything like faith, which really transcends any sentiment or sentience we might have. So, this objection to a computer program, no matter how complex, could have sentience, that just didn't sit right with me. But I'm not one to just take my own sentiment for that's the way it is. I said, let's try and understand that. So I started digging and reading all kinds of news feeds and looking for interesting and well thought out material. And little by little, a big picture emerged. It's a really big picture. And as you may see, down here, I've been working on this almost daily for the last 6 months, smithing, adding additional insights as they develop. And just a couple days ago, I had another, forgive me, Lord, brilliant insight into how to present how does this stuff work on a technical level without having to get into computer science or math or statistics or any of those advanced sciences. So I'll be updating that again in a couple days to incorporate this last item. Now, something that every sci-fi reader knows, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Ancient observation, I don't know by heart how many decades ago Arthur Clarke made that observation, but I think AI is one of those sufficiently advanced technologies that has a lot of us in awe on what is it, how does it work, what can it do, how will it impact society, economy, anything you can, law, anything you can put your name on, and we'll get into that. And I have to say one more thing. We'll get to that in the second week. But just because I stand here and I tell you what I've been able to figure out doesn't mean that I'm now suddenly an expert in this. And I pray that no one takes offense when I ask you to consider that after 3 weeks of this, you're not likely going to be experts either. So, as we go forward past this series into our daily lives, please keep an open mind. As I just said a couple days ago, something struck me on how I can present something better. This is constantly evolving and developing in my own insight on how it is, what it is and how it works, and in the way it will impact all of us. Yes?
Did you use AI to help generate this talk?
Nope.
Good for you.
Thank you. For those of us remote, the question was, did I use AI to generate this talk? And the answer is no. Or I would say, and I'll explain that in a moment when we get further in, to a minimal extent. So now, why are we talking about this? The big question for me is AI sentient? It's pervasive. Our older son is Dean of Students at Molloy University on Long Island, and the big academic integrity issue for them is AI-generated papers. It's everywhere. You may have read in the news a while back, a lawyer, I think a lawyer for Michael Cohen, the one of Trump fame, submitted a petition to the court that was AI generated, that quoted cases in case law that just plain didn't exist. Oops. The judge or the judge's clerk, discovered that, and the usual and required admonition ensued. But this stuff is everywhere. And we'll see quite a few examples. And anybody who knows my ability with a hammer knows not to trust me with one. I have some in my tool chest, and I will occasionally put up a picture hook or something like that. But just because I have a hammer, you wouldn't trust me to build you a home. It wouldn't come out right. And I can be blunt on that. So now for builders, we ask for references. But what do we ask for from the folks who provide us these AI programs? Do we ask for references? Should we ask for references? We'll get into that. Now, this is 3 charts, just overview of what we're going to cover in those 3 sessions. This is today's sessions, of course, and we'll take a look at, there are all kinds of AI, and we have different expectations and different requirements for each of them, and we'll get into that. Then week 2, that's the tough one, but don't let that scare you. I think I came up with a way to present how this works and why it works that's accessible to all of us. And I'll repeat it again. No math required, no statistics required, no computer science required. It's just going to be plain language such as we use every day. And a little bit of intuition, admittedly. And then the 3rd week, it's not quite as full as this chart makes it look like. But as I said, this stuff is pervasive. And if it's not pervasive yet, it will be so before long. So we've got all kinds of challenges, considerations. How does it work? Where does it get applied? How does it get applied and used? Can we trust it? When can we trust it? How do we know we can trust it? And all kinds of those considerations. We'll get into the 3rd week. So just to give you a quick overview. Now, we'll start with 5 very simple topics. And as I said, not all AI is alike, but before we get to that, there's something important. We don't have a vocabulary to describe what AI is, or how it works, or what it does. The terms we use, intelligence, AI, sentience, reason, plan, hallucinate, and we'll get into a lot of hallucinations. Those are all terms that we recognize as related and connected to human beings. Now, a computer is not a human being. I think we can all agree on that. A computer program doesn't make a computer a human being. But what language would we use to describe how a computer program of incredible complexity, admittedly, works? We don't have a vocabulary for that. So what we need to think about is when we use these terms, we immediately have a human context in mind. Somebody sitting next to us, a spouse, a parent, a child, a cousin, you name it. When we say they think, they feel, we connect that with them. We have to be extremely careful when we use these terms in the context of AI, that we don't confuse these terms and confound them and let them carry into AI the same human sentiments that we attach to them when we use these terms talking about another human or a human activity. Otherwise, we just convey all those attached values like a halo. You know? We attach all of those and convey all of those to that AI. That's not right. I think we can see that fairly quickly. There are distinctions here. And as I said, would we ever think an AI has faith? Probably not. We do. That's why we're here, amongst other things. By the way, as I had on the first chart, if you want a copy of that, email me, I'll send it. All of these blue things are links. You can click on them, you can look at the original article that discussed the topic in greater depth than I can do here, and I'm happy to share that. So in a sense, there's a challenge for homework for all of you. Now, when we talk about AI, what is that? And it's all kinds of different things. The AI that generates all the headlines right now tends to be the generative AI. But we've had AI programs long before then in the form of pattern recognition models. Smartphone autocorrect somebody? Am I allowed to use a curse word? Out autocorrect, damn autocorrect. Not very intelligent for most purposes, but still, there is a pattern recognition behind this, which is a form of AI. Google spell grammar check. If you use Gmail, you're getting it. And I don't know whether anybody else has that experience, but about 2 or 3 weeks ago, either my typing skills have suddenly gone way out into Never Never Land, or Google's grammar and spell check has gone way out. It used to be very reliable, catch just about any of the typos I made, and lately it's made some really unusual word substitutions. I think they changed something at their end. Grammarly, don't know whether we are all familiar with that. It's a document editor add-on that helps clean up grammar, as its name says, and it catches some spelling errors on the widely used, highly recommended. Reading medical images, that one you may have heard about, and we'll take another look at that. Identifying creative artists. If you let a pattern matching AI loose on, say, Shakespeare, you'll get a very rich vocabulary, certain cadences and word sequences he uses that are uniquely his, and you feed that AI anybody else's text and ask them, was this written by Shakespeare? And it will fairly reliably come back and say, probably not. We've also seen this lately used in identifying painters. We every so often, get the painter unknown or believed to be in particularly older medieval paintings. And we have relied on the expertise of people to tell us who's the painter. Now, AI can help us there because it can recognize patterns in light distribution, patterns in the way the brush strokes have been laid, the way pigment underneath the brush strokes might have been laid. And we have seen some cases recently where pictures that were maybe this or that famous painter were suggested by AI really is based on these kinds of patterns that it found. Or, gee, no, that really doesn't look like any of the other paintings he's done. So pattern matching API has been around for quite a while, very helpful, but it has its own challenges. And then, of course, the generative stuff that we hear about, Chat GPT, I've expanded that acronym for you, Generative pre-trained transformer. There's a particular technology behind it, and we'll dig into that because it is at the core of all this generative stuff, whether it's text or pictures or videos. It's all based on the same foundational technology that has grabbed the most headlines recently. Google has what they used to call Bard. They now call it Gemini. If you have an Android phone, they might have offered to you to use that on there. A company, Anthropic, has a AI called Claude, and there is just hundreds of them. This is not just these few. These are the ones that show up most often in the news and in the literature, but there is hundreds of them. Image. Generating images. Canva, which is, I think they've been bought by Adobe. DALL-E by OpenAI, they generate images, static images. And then emerging most recently, video. Sopra from OpenAI, they have not made that public. They are concerned about the potential for abuse. They will eventually make it public. There's money to be made, and we know how that goes. Money talks. Follow the money, right? Remember that, particularly in this area. And then there are different methods to train your AI. Data classification, that's probably the granddaddy of them, which sits behind many of the pattern recognition models. But it also has a cousin in the generative AI area. Reinforcement learning. We'll skip that. It's another method. There are lots of methods. Human reinforced learning, we'll touch on a little bit. That is basically when somebody sits there, prompts the AI on generate a text, a paragraph, and look at the result and say, I don't like this result. Thumbs down, try again. And over time, the AI learns what kinds of generated output is not acceptable to that human, which has its own problems because as humans, we all have biases. So all kinds of stuff, and we'll touch on many of these. So let's take a bit more basic, a bit deeper look at basic pattern recognition. And these are very simple, straightforward. Google used to train theirs on each individual Gmail user's writing and style. And as I said 2 or 3 weeks ago, that suddenly stopped working for me. Grammarly, there is an interesting question there. Should or should you not support the use of Grammarly in, say, an educational institution? And my older son and I have had some long talks about it, and we basically agree there's nothing nefarious about Grammarly because it fixes grammar mistakes, it cleans up language, but it doesn't generate ideas. In fact, our son observed if a student is coming from a socially or economically disadvantaged background, the use of a tool such as Grammarly will help elevate the language in their papers to a higher standard. It helps them. And again, Grammarly doesn't generate ideas. It fixes grammar. And the same goes for Google Spell Check and Grammar Assist. So as I said recently, I've been less than enamored by it. Medical images. Detecting small abnormalities. The showcase for that has made the press all over a few years back. A woman in the UK had a breast scan, and the breast surgeon said, it's a small 6-millimeter lesion here, nothing to worry about. And they ran the same scans through the AI, and the AI said, nope, malignant. It was in fact, they went back, it was in fact a stage 2 tumor. So, yeah, these programs can recognize patterns that escape us as humans. And there are some big questions which we'll get into in the third week that hide behind that. So they're certainly beneficial. But what if the AI had been wrong in this case? Very interesting. The second resource here from, it's from, forget where that one is from. I think it came from Nature, where the author really went through and looked at what worked, what did not work, what do we what do the breast surgeons need to think about when they look at one of these? This is a somewhat technical paper, but if you're interested in the use of pattern recognition AI in a medical setting, I highly recommend it. And then, of course, the second reference takes it a step further, which says, okay, now that the pattern matching AI has said there's a 6 millimeter lesion here, and I think it's pathological, will we let a generative AI write the report that says that? This stuff is everywhere. This is a really fun use of AI, pattern matching AI. You all know about the big eruption of Mount Vesuvius in, was it 76 AD? That buried Pompeii and its sister city Herculaneum. And it left many ancient scrolls totally charred, carbonized. This is what they look like. We can't read those because the moment we unroll them, they just fall to ashes. So some really bright folks let a scanning AI loose on it. The first step they had to figure out, which was done by another research team, is how to distinguish the carbonized ink from the carbonized papyrus. And they were able to make that distinction. And then they started scanning that. No unrolling, no unwrapping, just scan it as is. And they were able to decipher the top 15 layers of that scroll. There is pattern matching for you. Generative AI, these large language models, and we'll talk about them in great detail. I added a couple more here to the list. Copilot, if you're a Windows user, you may have seen a Copilot button pop up on your Windows machine. Microsoft is pushing that very heavily. Mistral is a French outfit, very good reputation, but as I said, there are hundreds of them. And this is just a small sampling of the ones you're most likely to encounter if you read daily news or something like that. Image generating models. One of the oldest is probably the St. Andrews face transformer, and we'll get to that in a moment. Ancient by modern standards, and video generating models which are just beginning to appear. Here I had a little fun. St. Andrews face transformer first appeared publicly in 2005. It's still out there, but you really need to make some changes to your web browsers if you want to use it. That's technical stuff, we'll leave that alone. Way back when, I fed it with a couple of pictures. One was a professional picture taken at around 1980. And I said, give me back that picture in 2 different styles. And that's what it came up with. And the other one, I fed it in 2010, roughly, and give me back the same 2 styles, and that's what it came back with. Where has that taken you? If you have ever used a filter in one of your chat applications, that's where that has taken you. It can make you look different, still you, but different. Or as happens with my brother-in-law in his Zoom session, he put in a little puppy face. So whenever we see him, we see the puppy with eyes moving and mouth moving and all those things. And he hasn't been able to figure out how to get rid of it. But that's how far back some of these roots go. This has been with us for 19 years, and it's found its way almost everywhere. Again, here are some resources, and we'll leave it at that. Claims for AI are all over the place. The one that got my goat was it's sentient. And as I've explained several times, I just found that hugely objectionable, if not at least questionable. Frightening. Well, my brother-in-law who can't get rid of the puppy face in his Zoom session. Not necessarily frightening, but he couldn't get rid of it again. So now where will that take us? Think about a patient. Let's stick with woman breast scan. And the AI says there is something here, and the women here, I think, all know the routine that comes next. Needle biopsy, more scans, and all this painful and very, very upsetting stuff. What if the AI is wrong? In the legal context, when it starts building case files that never existed, will it take over the world? Well, it could, if we let it. How do we deal with that? It's useful. Certainly it's useful. But we need to understand when it's useful, where it's useful. It's self-learning. That means once we get one of these things going, it can continue to watch its own output, how we react to it, and improve its internal algorithms based on our reaction. That underlies the training through a human feedback approach. Is that a human trait? If I look around, I have not put anybody to sleep just yet, so I think we are okay there. But is looking for feedback and reacting to feedback a human trait? Most definitely. So we see some of these things that can be really frightening pop up in this technology. What about biases? There's a training data set here, and we'll look at that. But that training data set doesn't encompass anything we together could think about and come up with. Let me take a very simple example. Let's assume we're talking Huskin and AI. Who is the president, the 46th president of the United States? Assume an AI trained on Washington Post or New York Times. We hope that the answer it comes back with is Joe Biden. Take an AI that's been trained on One America News Network. We might very well get back the answer. It's Donald J. Trump. This is and if we train an AI on the Bible, why not? There's lots of stuff in there that we'd like to get more accessible. The answer we pray is going to be, I don't know. But what an AI typically does in this case is it comes up with an answer. It makes up an answer, and we call that hallucination. Now, I have no idea what the Bible would hallucinate or what an AI trained on the Bible would hallucinate, but that's what these AIs typically do. No answer is not an acceptable answer in the way they are trained. Racial bias, social bias, and we'll get into some example in the third week when we dig more deeply into that. It is embedded in these AIs as much as it is admittedly embedded in any one of us. Think about that for a moment. But I'm willing to bet, and I'll take the number one here, that if we think about how we react to some people or events, or walking down the street, looking at the houses in the neighborhood, we all carry biases with us. AIs are no different. They carry the biases from their training data sets, but they bring them to the front just as we might, except we typically catch ourselves when something like that happens and say, I don't think I should have said that. I'm sorry. We haven't gotten the AIs to that point yet. So there's something hidden here. And this is a brave new world. There is no way that we can avoid AI, whether it's pattern matching or generative, becoming pervasive in our world, in our institutions, in our societies, economies, in you name it. There's just no way we can avoid it. So there's going to be a huge challenge in the end. How do we live in a world that is that heavily penetrated and maybe even shaped by AI? Let's take a quick look at environment and economics. AI is hugely energy intensive. The estimates on how much energy AI presently consumes are very, very crude. And the projections are equally as crude. So, take that with, I don't know, a whole jug full of doubt. But there is an estimate that in a couple of years, AI could consume 1 to 2% of global energy. You may need to let that sink in. 1 to 2% of global energy. And that is energy, I dare say, that was not in anybody's projection on what it would take to decarbonize economies. So now not only do we have to decarbonize countries, nations, the world, by switching from fossil fuel to something renewable, wind, solar, you name it, but we have to potentially produce an additional 1 to 2% on a global scale on top of that. I think there's reason for concern here. And whether the estimates are right or not is beside the point. It's big. And it is additional energy that somehow we need to provide. And then, aside from the raw energy, the electricity, there's also a materials supply chain. These big, huge computers that are used to train and run these AI models, they need to be built. They're not coming out of nothing. There are metals, plastics, all kinds of things that go into those computers. Is that what our best use for these materials? How do we pay for this stuff? Right now, much of it, particularly older models, are available publicly for anybody to use. And that's how we got Pope Francis in a white Balenciaga puffer coat. That picture you may have seen in the news 2-3 months ago. Is that a good use of energy and materials? I don't think so. But okay, this technology is in its early stages, and people are just going to play with it, particularly if it doesn't cost them anything. But longer term, how do we pay for that? These are not trivial expenditures. This is not a postage stamp here or postage stamp worth there. These are, whether the estimates are right or not, these are huge investments and expenditures and huge cost to use one of those models. And all I can tell you at this moment, particularly when it comes to election misinformation, follow the money. Right? We all remember that from 1974, I think it was. Follow the money. If you see something that looks AI generated, whether it's labeled or not, the first defense you have in understanding whether somebody is trying to manipulate you or not, or from what perspective they are trying to manipulate you, is try to figure out who paid for it. That's the first layer of defense that we all have. Again, several resources here that ultimately led to the 1 to 2%, maybe more, maybe less. And the last one, electricity is a bull market for the first time in decades. I'm not telling you to invest in your local generating facility. But believe me, they are very happy because all our home appliances have been more efficient, more efficient, more efficient. Yes, there are more of them, but more efficient, more efficient, more efficient. The power generating market has been fairly stagnant for a long time. Here, they see a tremendous upswing in demand, potentially. So they're very happy, but they may be the only ones who are really happy about it. As I said, don't invest in your local power generation company based on that. All right. We're a little early here, but I'm suggesting that we take a break and we come back not next week, as it says here, but in 2 weeks. And then we'll dig a little deeper and see how does this stuff work and why does it work. And on that note, today, any questions, comments?
There's one ingredient that is missing in all of this, and it's very interesting that you mentioned the medical aspect of that. Because before I retired, that's one of the things that was introduced, where people who smoke or who stop smoking, they ask them at a certain age to go and have something called low-dose CT, because it can detect the nodule a lot sooner. Because before it used to be like if you have lung cancer, it's a death sentence. Now we can see it coming. What should have happened in about 15, 20 years? We can see it now. So there's a software then that we now use that while it's taking that CT, anything in your chest, all the way to your navel, it can also detect anything that is cancerous there. But the interesting thing that I think is missing from all of this is the ethics. Unfortunately, our lawmakers are not that intelligent, enough to kind of bring the people who are intelligent together to guide them. Because by the time they are reactionary, by the time they react to the situation, it's already gone. So I think if they can bring together like they do, like Academy of Science or Academy of IT, just to use the word lately, very loosely. If they can bring those people who know how this works and inject the ethics into it, just like you cannot experiment with people after Second World War, the rules were changing for clinical trials. Now is the time for them to bring people around to come up with the rules and regulations, what we can do and what we cannot do with the technology. Otherwise, it's going to be a very serious situation.
Yeah, and I think we're heading into that very serious situation. We'll talk a bit more about the ethics. We're looking ahead a little bit to week 3 since we have the time. Should we license a X-ray reading or generally medical image reading program? We don't do that today. We license the physician or the radiologist and the the imaging technologist. Yeah. By the way, to your point, Teddy, one of my brothers-in-law went in about 9 months ago for an abdominal MRI, and the imaging technology person glitched a little bit, and they caught the bottom of his lungs. One of them had stage 2 cancer in it. It was a glitch. It wasn't intended to be on that image. They saw it. He's in treatment. And this past week, Tuesday, he celebrated last treatment cancer-free. So, there's a lot of, it happens by chance that we catch it in medical imaging.
A question maybe you probably will be dealing with it later on. So to go back to your initial issue of sentience, how do you define sentience? And if you had sentience, what is it that you would be able to say, yes, this AI does have sentience?
Yeah.
Or are there tests that you have in mind that would determine whether or not?
There are presently no tests for that. Definition of sentience gets us deep into philosophy, and you may have seen all over the news this week that a Professor Dennett, now I forget the first name, passed away, philosopher, and he was working in, amongst other things, sentience, awareness, AI. Is AI sentient or not? And I got to tell you honestly, the discussion that these folks can get into, I don't understand it. I have absolutely no training, education, or background in it, but I'll have some references that you can dig into if you wish on your own. What is clear though, we had for the longest time in computer science something called the Turing test, named after a British computer science, Alan Turing. And he said, how do we know whether a machine program is intelligent? He said, well, we'll put the machine into one room, we'll put a person into another room, and they can type back and forth. They can't see each other, they can't hear each other. And when the person, the real life person, looks at the responses coming from the other room and says, gee, that sounds just like Uncle Joe. Well, he didn't say Uncle Joe, but another human. It doesn't sound stilted, artificial, wrong. That's the point when we think that computer program in that other room has intelligence. We are beyond that point. And now the question is, we've gotten beyond that point. What tests do we still have left that would tell us, am I talking to another human being in that room, or am I talking to an AI? There is no test for that at this time. I don't know whether we'll have one anytime soon. These modern AIs are incredibly good. Yeah, Daniel.
Last spring, my philosophy professor made the final assignment to write a paper using AI. And we had to write about the topic was Asian philosophy, so it was Buddhism. And it was, it was very interesting. It knew the names like Siddhartha, like all these names, and I could actually write a full function and essay using AI. So that was, I guess, like a legal, it was an acceptable, way to do the project because that was the point. But that was a year ago.
Yeah.
So it is definitely interesting when you talk about stuff like metaphysics and that all stuff. Like I don't know what they're talking about. It can somehow logically explain it.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I don't know if it could be sentient, but just like a little animal.
It sure feels like it.
Yeah.
Rick? Thank you, Daniel.
Here's an example that may incorporate the questions of sentience, questions of ethics, and this concept of systems. So far in our, thank you very much for doing this. For this introduction, we're talking about kind of discrete things that test the Turing test of, is it functioning? The chat GPT where we have a single interaction. But all these things exist in systems. Yesterday I learned something I didn't know, which is good every day. But that at a certain university, the admissions director and all the people associated with admitting students to this institution would sit around and have their criteria and discuss balance and academic standing to admit new students. And I learned yesterday that at a certain institution, this is now done with a computer program.
Oh.
Now, what parts of all of our systems are, we used to call it automation, now having a computer program make a decision in the absence of discussion with humans and the ethics that each human brings with them. And so when decisions are made based on algorithms, which is an equation that describes part of a system, without the ethics, is that sentience or lack of sentience? So if we humans give up, in the case of the admissions being done by a computer now instead of a committee that's reading essays and things like that, are we giving up our sentience to a machine learning algorithm? And where is the ethical statement in that?
Thank you. A great example. In my mind, the ethics in that are missing. Is it better? Oh, we got to define what better means than a committee of people making the decisions. You know, the people are bringing their own biases and perceptions to this task. No question about it. But we also know, and we've touched upon it, we'll get into it more deeply, the AI brings its biases and perceptions to the same tasks. And as humans, we can challenge each other. No, I read this paper differently. To me, that says this potential student is that kind of a person. Can you do that with an AI? When the AI makes the decision and spits out the list of here are the ranked candidates for admission? You probably should be.
Well, who inputs the information into the AI program?
Big question. There's a lot of information that goes in during the so-called training phase. And then in Rick's example, presumably somebody sits and scans the essays and application forms into the AI, which knows how to read them and knows, I apologize, this is a human-centric term, which, for lack of a better language, as I said earlier, we don't have a machine-appropriate language. So we got to use human terms, but don't forget we're using human terms. It's got to interpret and read something into the essays to understand what that potential student is like as a person and as a academician. I shudder at that thought.
Exactly.
Yeah, I do too.
Just a devil's advocate point on this, if you're an admissions officer reading admissions and you're reading thousands of them, in BU had 62,000 applications this year for this fall. And after you've read 200, are you going to be paying very much attention? Are you going to be missing things? One could make the argument that the AI does not miss things.
Yep.
I mean, the AI will read everything in there, and probably with the minimum of mistakes.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you're absolutely right about the biases and what's going to be lost. And are you going to see an essay where there's some real opportunity here? Some kind of character that somebody has that AI might miss.
Yeah, and allow me to go back to that example of and your point's well taken, John, to the student coming from inner city, non-white school, grew up in an environment where making it through high school, neighbors making it through high school was not common. That person is going to write very differently and have many more grammar mistakes in their essay, no matter how much help their high school counselors gave them. Yet that person may be the brightest of the bunch. He just hasn't had the opportunity to express it in language. How do you deal with that? And to go back to the medical question, there are huge ethics questions all over the place. And I said earlier, we license our medical professionals. And if they don't perform well, we yank their license. What are you going to do with an AI? Number one, it's not licensed. Number two, it could, in some cases, make better decisions than your licensed professional. And in others, it could make worse decisions than your licensed professional.
And your example, though, with that, what is the sort of breadth or lack thereof of the margins that are considered normal versus those that it's now said, well, it's this versus that? That's a piece I'm not hearing, and I don't know whether they've gotten to that point.
They have not. And that one paper that I mentioned from Nature talks about that. And it really talks about, I'm sorry, I have to talk a little bit statistics here. When we build a model or a forecast using statistical methods, we usually say, well, we are 95% confident that the real events will evolve along that path. We do not have these kinds of statistics for even pattern matching AIs. We do not. And that's one of the challenges that paper calls out. If we want to use AI, pattern matching AI, and I think we now have a rough sense of what pattern matching is versus generative. If we want to use pattern matching AI in a medical setting, we have to know how many times it's going to raise an alarm when in fact there is no cause for concern. That's known as a false positive. And we have to know how many times it fails to raise an alarm when there is cause for concern. That's known as a false negative. We do not have that for the medical image reading, to stick with those AIs or programs that are in common use. We all, believe me, I'm with that. We all get carried along in the wave of excitement on how much better this is than what we have been able to do. And then we don't ask the question now, how much better really is it? What are the risks in using it?
But with the intention of making a segue to next session or the third session, when you have a feedback loop, when you say to the computer program, well, you were 90% right, but here are the 10% of the cases that you missed completely, and here are the details of those 10%, and all of a sudden your computer program might now become 96% accurate. So with feedback mechanisms, and this is on the hopeful front for this technology, it can improve, and in the case where you build in that feedback in the original program, it can improve itself.
Yep. And that is an absolutely essential part in any AI that we operate, that we continue to keep feeding it more data to help improve its ability to figure out what's going on.
Peter, many of us have this little ball that sits in our living room that we can ask, who was the first president of the United States? Respond, George Washington. Is this a form of artificial intelligence?
Yes, absolutely. That's behind all of those little devices and what have you that we've got sitting in our living rooms and all over the place on our smartphones. Absolutely.
I think I'm going to ask more questions.
Yes. So one thing to get back to Rick once more, that concept of constantly learning. We do this every day. A year ago, if I would have asked you, what does October 7 mean to you? What would you have said? Well, maybe one or the other amongst us has somebody with a birthday on that day. But since October 7, 2023, that date has changed its meaning. And we know that. We read the news. I don't need to explain the news. We read it. We know what happened. And we know what went from there. But if you stop training your AI in, let's say, July of 2023, asked it, what's the meaning of October 7? I can't tell you what it would have come up with, but something totally unrelated to what's going on in the Near East. So this notion of constant training and bringing the training data sets up to the latest and greatest insights to improve accuracy, as Rick pointed out, that has to be baked into any of these AI uses. Otherwise, they become less and less relevant. So we can't live without that constant retraining. And that's another one of these ethics questions. How do you know whether the AI that you just asked the question has been retrained on the latest and greatest recently? We don't know. We trust the folks who give us the AI that hopefully they did it. I wouldn't bet my paycheck on it.
But you know, this kind of follows the human experience in that or parallels it in that when you go to a doctor, you ask the doctor, how many times have you done this surgery?
Yeah.
You want to know. And you look at those things. Teachers are being trained from the beginning that you are a lifelong learner. What you learned in college is not going to take you through the rest of your career. If you are not willing to continually put in that data and that new data, especially as science proves something wrong or accurate, more accurate, if you're not willing to continue to put that new data in, you're not going to have that improvement. So this type of thing really just follows what we know of as learning and what we know of as continually learning.
And what we know of as no.
Well, yes, but ethics, one of the points I wanted to make is the ethics are also evolving. Whether we like it or not, there's nobody that says this is what is right and this is what is wrong. It's not black and white. And if you go to whether it's cultural differences or whether it's geographical differences or whatever, you will find a different set of what is acceptable. And that's really what determines our ethics. So it's going to be an evolving thing. We can't even get our Congress to agree on what is ethically right. So to have them come up with laws about regulating, I completely agree with what you said. I just wonder. I think we're going to need AI to come up with the ethics so that it can feed itself.
Well, but you see, the ethics, the basic tenet of ethics, which comes from the Greeks, is the same. Now, what changes it or tweaks it is the culture or the moral of the society.
Exactly.
You know, stealing is stealing anywhere you go. And every culture knows that when you steal, it's bad. Marry more than one woman, that depends where you go. In some, communities, it's viewed very dimly, and in some, it's a positive way to show your wealth. So, but the basic tenet of it is still the same, which is, does it harm somebody? Is it good for the people that is exposed to it? And how can you best walk through it to make sure that it's fair? So that the basic tenet of the ethics, I think, is solid. The effect from the society is what will tweak it and make it different.
Oh, I agree. But I'm saying if you get 100 people in the room and you go through those tenets, they may have 100 different ideas.
That's true.
About it. So it's just it's a discussion and a thought, but it takes me back to always ask, where did this come from? What was the source and what was their motivation for making that decision? And you have to do that when you read. You have to do that when you learn. you have to do that even when you're just speaking with people. You kind of have to be thinking, what's the motivation behind this, and where did this thought originate, and how did it originate?
And to pick up on that, and we are a little
Heading into overtime, but the motivation for me to dig into that was I didn't think computer programs would be sentient. So, Steve, your point, I said, okay, let's dig into that and see what I can figure out.
and we'll continue this in a couple of
Weeks. And thank you all for sitting through that.